we look at cities, we all have our own individual ways in which we like to look at cities and the things in which we measure other cities and their success. These three particular characteristics are ones that I use. These are very helpful in looking at cities, but they're particularly important in looking at mixed income housing. The first one is obvious sense of place and the way in which you feel when you're in the city and the kind of character of what it has. The ease of getting around a city and the connectivity that it brings. This is about making a city almost luxurious for everyone. The feeling that you can flow through a city without barriers as a pedestrian, on a bicycle, through transit. And last is diversity. This includes things like economic diversity, typological diversity, but also income diversity to avoid concentrations of poverty and so forth. What better place to talk about these three characteristics than in Charleston? We are here. I remember at our board meeting on Friday, Richard Economakis said, the reason why we're here in Charleston is not because of any individual building, but because we're in the quality of the place. That's what's really drawn us to Charleston. This is a place with diverse streetscapes and incredible language of both the public realm, a great public realm, but also really outstanding private gardens and private realm that interact with the street and create a remarkable streetscape, something that's incredibly memorable. It has those kind of things that are the feeling that you can flow through the city, all that diversity and the building typology diversity. And by the way, I want to make sure I mention that when I'm talking about building type diversity, I'm not talking about the gas station on the other side of the park, but all the wonderful architecture that we know and love about Charleston. Those kinds of characteristics are what makes Charleston so desirable, but it also is one of the issues that is also driving Charleston to deal with affordable housing and mixed income housing head on. We heard a lot about a number of great efforts that Liz presented last night in her keynote talk. The affordable housing shortage is something that is an incredible issue in the United States. I liked how Liz described it last night as this is a wicked problem. It's a problem that we need to deal with head on. This number is extraordinary. 7.3 million homes. That's not homes. These are, when you think about 2 to 3 people per household, the numbers are extraordinary. This does not include workforce housing. I don't want to be a doomsday scenario, but when you think about the issues and the trajectory of what we're on, this could actually cause incredible unrest in some areas, and the fact that people are denied the basics of shelter. So these are issues that we need to be taking on head on. The ICAA, I was pleased to hear Liz share a bit about the ICAA pattern book. This is a document which Urban Design Associates, we were very honored to be part of. We wanted to mention a couple things that's important about it. One is that it was an incredible team effort. We included ICAA member firms of great landscape work by LaQuatre Bonsi. It also has a plan book at the back, which had work of a number of architects of ICAA architects, such as Scott Merrill, Eric Mosier, Pierre Carlo Bontempi, and Victor Dupi all contributed plans at the back of the book. It also inspired, or may have been a parallel effort, the ICAA Southern California chapter developed a plan book of other locally appropriate plans for Habitat for Humanity. The most important issue that we want to bring forward about this document is something that's at the core of what we're talking about in this practice, is that this document is actually funded by the National Endowment for the Arts based on a number of national research studies that said that a large percentage of Americans at this time would accept affordable housing in their neighborhood if it fit in. So that particular phrase is incredibly important because it shows that design is a big part of the relationship of affordable housing to your neighborhood and to any individual place. It's an architectural problem. It brings in typological discussion. It brings in innovation and the kinds of things that we as architects can take on at the ICAA. It also is the foundation of the development of the ICAA Gindros Award. This is to highlight outstanding work of affordable housing across the United States and abroad. It's a recognition to a commitment to high quality design and in the built environment. The Housing Authority of City of Santa Barbara was our 2022 winner, which we were the jury was so enamored with the fact that they would take city-owned parking lots, use traditional typologies of the courtyard housing to solve issues of homelessness and workforce housing, and build the city of Santa Barbara in the way in which it was intended. So it's starting to continue to build the urban tradition in Santa Barbara. In 2023, we just returned from Providence to giving the award to Union Studio in Providence, who's doing the same, an extraordinary practice which is using locally appropriate typologies to help rebuild neighborhoods. The award was, of course, developed and named in recognition of Ray's 50 years of practice in mixed income housing and also to thank him for his years on the board at the ICAA. Our first discussion, Ray will be sharing affordable housing in the American city. In this particular context, it's somewhat a little bit different than what we're going to hear. It's kind of similar and a more contrasting presentation from Hugh, but the problems are all the same. One of the things that when you're working in American cities is the challenge of creating a sense of wholeness. I actually want to reference the talk that Hugh gave to kick off the conference, was talking about Cat Fiddle Street. This is another project that is very similar into the sense that you're trying to create a sense of wholeness about a neighborhood and using innovation at the same time to deliver a place that feels like it's always been there. Witold also referred to the book by Christopher Alexander, A New Theory of Urban Design, of which he unveiled 4 principles for development. And he also added agency. Parenthetically, I'd also like to even add a 6th, which is stewardship. But one of the things that was important about when you read the book is that Alexander was talking about that sense of wholeness within the project, but also within the city. So the relationship of what Cat Fiddle Square is doing and what we're talking about today are very, very similar challenges. Ray will be taking us through a number of examples of the ability to develop those same principles of the idea of a sense of place and ease of getting around the city to feel like you're actually enhancing the city and at the same time providing a diversity of income to avoid concentrations of poverty and so forth. But also, last I want to mention is that in many ways, the big picture of this is it's like a spare part trying to fix an area of the city. We are very lucky to have Hugh Petter here from the UK, who's come across the Atlantic here to share the project of Nansleden in Newquay, UK. This is a type of project that's almost like, it's like a new machine. It's like built up from the ground up, even though it's an extension of existing town. But it's built with all those ideas of traditional patterns to develop jobs and opportunities, sustainable practices, but also in a remarkable 30% of affordable housing. In many ways, when we're working in cities in the United States, we're hoping for connectivity and hoping to rebuild job growth and those kinds of things with policies that extend beyond your borders. This project kind of brought it together into one incredible, very compelling project that we're interested in sharing. I'll do a brief introduction to Hugh, and then I'm going to pass and then Ray. But Hugh, we're very lucky to have him. He's principal at Adam Architecture. He is also one of the foundational. He established the foundation course at the Prince's Foundation for the Built Environment. He's also an author. I'm going to surprise him and mention that he also has a book signing at 1 o'clock, between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock across the park at the Dewberry Hotel. I know that a number of you are going to be doing the remarkable tour, which is a tour that's promised to be a very remarkable one with Vince Graham and Andres Dewani of ION. So that will give you enough time to get over there. I'm going to be first. I have an early flight, so I'm going to try to be first in line at 1 o'clock for an opportunity to talk to get a book from Hugh and from Clive. Our first speaker is going to be Ray Gindros. Ray is also an author. He has a book coming out called Taking a Pen for a Walk. Both these two didn't know that I was going to mention that. I'm getting no kickbacks on that. But Ray was obviously a co-founder and chairman of Urban Design Associates. He's past chairman of Congress into Urbanism and an ICA board member. He also taught urban design for 20 years at Yale. So please join me in welcoming Ray Gindros to the podium.
Thank you very much, Eric, for that introduction and for getting us focused on the issues. And it's I want to thank the ICAA for this process of expanding the range of interests of the organization to include critical topics like affordable housing. I'm also grateful for you're hosting a kind of reunion between you and myself. We haven't seen each other for 20 years, so this is a great, it's a great pleasure to be together. So I also thank Eric for a rather curious but intriguing title for this. The first part, connecting to society through the front door, and I want to emphasize front door, obviously. I'll talk about towards the end of the talk. Town making and mixed income housing is a formidable challenge. And when we talk about mixed income housing, by definition, we're talking about affordable housing. We have, as Eric has already started talking about, an incredible crisis in affordable housing. Headline, or excuse me, a small article in the Times last week described a professional single mother earning $72,000 a year who is living in her car with her young child and then going to community centers for showers. $72,000 a year and homeless. Now, obviously, there may be other circumstances, but that's a particularly vivid example. If you look at the statistics, you'll find that the income of a majority of Americans translated into purchasing power for a house or renting an apartment is significantly lower than the cost of housing. There is a gap, a huge gap, and I think it's becoming increasingly one of the most pressing issues of our time. We've got so many crises it's hard to keep up, but this is one that we as a group can do something about. And so therefore, this concept of, now, I thought I might start with something a little bit dreary, but it'll get livelier later on, don't worry. I thought I'd give you a little primer of what at least I'm aware of in ways in which new affordable housing is provided. Now, all of us architects love to fantasize that we can come up with a design which will be affordable. Doesn't work. Almost never works. In a few cases it will work. Why? Well, there are other forces out there besides the size of the house and the simplicity of construction. And there are other costs. There are land costs, financing costs, marketing costs, permitting costs, which in many cases are formidable because of resistance to affordable housing. So it becomes a long and protected process. So the gap is still there, no matter how clever we are in the design. Now, there is always affordable housing in extremely undesirable areas. Prices are low for a reason. And brave pioneers are still going in to gang-controlled neighborhoods and starting the process of fixing them up, fixing up houses, or building new ones. But it's rare, and it takes a certain kind of person to be able to do that. And the best ways in which those are done are in which there are incentives to make the affordability more likely. When there's tax delinquent properties, cities often will sell them for $1 on condition that the new owner improve the properties and live in it for some period of time. Sometimes infrastructure is provided and utilities are provided to subsidize it. And that can work when it's a coordinated strategy. It doesn't help to have a house here, and a house there with a bunch of crack houses in between. That doesn't work very well. But if you concentrate it, it can begin to work. And then there are grants, private foundations, state, local, national governments issue grants for various parts of housing that you can tap into. And there are the volunteer and self-help programs, the most famous of which is Habitat for Humanity. And one of the compelling reasons that we were very interested in taking the challenge of doing a pattern book is in many of the communities in which we worked, usually historic neighborhoods that were in severe disrepair with severe problems, when a habitat house would come up in its traditional design, normal design, people would start saying, uh-oh, here goes the neighborhood. That's the last straw. And we get that because it diminishes the character and quality. So, and Habitat was very aware of that, and we're very excited about the pattern book. I don't know how well it's been used recently, but it was quite actively for a while. Now, there's a whole category. The majority of affordable housing in the United States is provided through some form of state or federal subsidy. The most popular one at the moment is a bit like a Rube Goldberg diagram, but a cartoon, but it's called tax credit financing, where you can get tax credits for the construction of the housing. Usually these are syndicated and sold to investors. It usually involves somewhere between 18 and 25% of the cost is covered with that kind of financing. Still not everything, but some. You can get tax credits for low-income housing. You can get tax credit for historic preservation. Really clever people combine the two and get a lot more bang for the buck in that situation. Then in straight federal work, there is, of course, the legacy of public housing, which I will show in various points. The lessons we learn from that are the fatal mistakes you make when you focus only on the affordability part. Try to get the cheapest possible way of housing, or in this case, warehousing, people in a sanitary position. Because those kinds of programs in the past, not so much now, and I'm a little bit worried about other things going on now, in the focus on the difficult problem of getting to affordability, forget all about the fact that it's for human beings. And there are qualities that are essential to us as people that affect us psychologically and socially and affect our capacity to succeed in life and to flourish. And so my talk is focused on those qualities. I'm not going to try to come up with solutions for affordable housing. I'm going to focus on those qualities because I've become alarmed and feel that an alarm needs to be sounded on it. Now, public housing is a disaster. In the 90s, the Hope 6 program took 100 or so, later more, distressed projects, tore them down, and they were rebuilt as mixed-income neighborhoods. The key is the difference between traditional public housing and the Hope 6 program. Traditional public housing, there were federal standards designed in Washington, and the package was sort of flown across the country and dropped on a site into an unaware community like a spaceship that was landing. It had no difference. Hope 6 turned that upside down. The funding was awarded to cities who made proposals for how they would, and you had to engage citizens in making that proposal before it went in. And you say how you would spend the money, and the projects had to be turned over to private developers to manage the projects. And it was very stiff competition, and it was designed to use the money, federal money, in a way that the community wanted it to be used. Upside down, and it worked. And the later generation of that is the Choice Neighborhood Program. And then there is inclusionary zoning, which is certainly a good idea. Certainly all over Europe, it's normal practice. In this country, it usually causes civil wars to break out in some cases. So it's a great idea, and in some cases it'll work, but it's troublesome. So this human quality of the environment and of housing is what I'm going to focus on, and I have 4 topics, which I won't read. You can see them right there, and we'll take them one by one. And the examples I'm using from my own work and from UDA's work are from the early years when these ideas were forming. And because some of them have been up for 40 years, 30 or 40 years, we can see how they're working or not working, and I'll use that as an illustration for each of these theories. Also a couple more recent projects. And certainly examples from the 2 ICAA Affordable Housing Award winners will also be included in this, so you have a sense of how these projects respond to these challenges. And there's one more. There's one more person I'm illustrating. And that is, I believe, to be one of the greatest French urban design theorists of the 20th century. His name is Jean-Jacques Sempé. He's better known in the United States for his New Yorker covers and for the cartoons that he has inside. So two of them that you can see here, and we're using it for the first example. I was thunderstruck in graduate school by a book called Slums and Social Insecurity by Alvin Shore, a sociologist and social worker, who poses the question, is there a causal relationship between the physical design of a community and a dwelling and social insecurity, or to put it another way, in our ability to succeed in life and move forward? It's a rhetorical question, but he obviously thought it was true. He had two main points, and those are two of the 4 points I'm raising. One is dwelling as mirror of ourself. We have a self-image. We look at ourselves in the mirror, we comb our hair. But our house is a mirror. What does it look like? In contrast with what we see in the media or in other neighborhoods and part of the city. Is that a positive image in that mirror, or is it negative? If it's positive, it reinforces our self-image, which reinforces self-confidence, which enables us to have the get up and go and take on tough challenges and go get a new kind of job or get an opportunity or get an additional piece of education or whatever it is. So clearly the lady on the left is thrilled with her mirror coming out into the sunshine. And the obviously extraordinarily rich and powerful gentleman on the right sees himself in the rich and powerful, quite over-the-top architecture of his dwelling. On the other hand, if it's a negative image, in contrast with more affluent parts of town on the right, this little fellow is going to have a tough time. Because that negative image diminishes our self-image, which erodes our self-confidence, which makes it more and more difficult to succeed in life. It all comes back to Oscar Wilde. Only a fool does not judge by appearances. And so the image of what we build is critical. Now, by far the worst examples in the United States were public housing. In a project similar to this, but a different one, we spent a lot of time in public housing projects over the course of 30 or 40 years, meeting with residents and talking with residents and trying to understand what their aspirations were and how they felt about where they were. And the elephant in the room was always the stigma of living in a project. One man said it this way. He said, "We are brown buildings with brown windows, with brown grass and brown people who we scare the rest of the city. People are afraid of us." Another said, "Public housing buildings are to the illicit drug trade what Golden Arches are to McDonald's. The majority of customers are suburban, affluent people." This particular project, we were asked in 1992 to help. What happens in many projects is the crime comes from outside. In this case, drug gangs had taken over. And residents were unable to feel comfortable going outside. They couldn't plant flowers because they'd be trampled. They couldn't sit outside because they might be beaten up. They slept on the floor on mattresses to avoid bullets flying through the windows at night. And the Housing Authority had come into some money for superficial improvements. And the director said to me, "Look, we could do new windows and stuff, but it's not going to make a difference. Can you do something that will change the social condition to make it work?" So we met a great many times with the residents and set up criteria. And they had a yearning for a normal neighborhood. A normal neighborhood. It wasn't grand or elegant. It was just a normal neighborhood. So we did a few simple things. You can see on the upper left the basic barracks-like box of the building with no amenities between the building and the outside. We added a series of things. White windows, kept the brick, which people loved. Porches with white columns, which were like the neighborhood. A street so that you could park in front of your house and have an address. Fundamental notion of citizenship is to have an address. You have an address, which you didn't before. There were just numbers on the end of the building. And then some sort of fencing to protect some of the areas. So shortly after construction, this man, who loved gardening but couldn't do it, started doing a great deal, and then started teaching his neighbors and friends how to manage landscaping their property. And one of the happiest persons there was Mrs. Soames, who here you see at the beginning of her garden, but in a year or two, it was just all over the place. She even wore outfits that were all plant-based. She loved gardening so much, and here she was able to fulfill that kind of ambition. On the left, you see the school, and in the distance, the porches. The AIA Foundation made a film that included this project, and they interviewed the teachers in the school who said, after the renovation, teachers did much better because they no longer felt like they were kids from the project, but from the neighborhood. You see on the left, on the right, excuse me, some of the porches. One time I was there several years after the construction, and the porch had one column missing. Very funny. It was a simple pediment thing, and no column. You know what Alberti said? You can't either add or subtract anything from a composition. People were upset. Next time I came back, a few months later, it was fixed. And I was talking with a resident across the street, looking at it. She said, you know, that was a drug family. I learned later they were the last of the drug families to be evicted. We were all so afraid of them, nobody reported. But when they damaged the column, we were outraged. That isn't just their column, it's our column. It's our community. And they talked to the police, and within a month, the family was gone. So let's see, again, appearances are extremely important. It's not a one battle. That was 1993. This is 2020. This is a tax credit financed affordable housing project, and you're looking at the main entrance to the hallways that serve the apartments. Now, what kind of a self-image do generators and meters and a grate, not a door, a grate, make? And it meets all the code requirements, all of the funding requirements. Just imagine what that must be like as an image and how it erodes what you're doing. 10 years ago, a project of ours was completed in New Orleans in the Treme neighborhood, in which we worked very hard on the image of entrance and door. This is a smaller apartment. It's only a 4-unit building. But you can see the kids are happy in front of it. And it plugs into the character of the neighborhood, which is the second part of this mirror of self. The neighborhood is another kind of mirror of self. And can you work in such a way that you bring about the revitalization of the neighborhood by reinforcing its strengths? That building is a replacement for the project on the left, which was damaged during Katrina. HUD mandated that they come down. There was a huge, complicated, stormy process, which even created a television program called Treme, in which the whole action was about condemning the demolition of the project, and the Preservation Committee and citywide people were against it, except for one thing. The residents wanted a better life. They wanted a better life. We had stand-downs in huge public meetings between advocates who had no connection to the neighborhood and the people who lived in it. New Orleans is a city in which people live in houses. Buildings are jails, schools, hospitals, institutions. So they were living in institutions. They liked the bricks. They called them the bricks because it was solid. But they'd much rather have houses. So we developed a plan in various stages with different kinds of houses. This is a model for one of the charrettes. And there were about 10 architects that joined us. Marianne Cusado was one, and a number of ICAA architects, and then Tulane University was there, and for political reasons, we took on a young faculty member who was doing an extremely modernist thing with his students, and he came with students and they did designs. So for the charrette, when we were testing the design, we put their elevations up on the wall. You can see it behind there. And we have a process of using red dots and green dots and blue dots. Red dots are what you don't like. Well, the modernist ones, people said, who would want to live in something that looks like a phone booth? And the houses did best. But even traditional multi-unit buildings that looked suspiciously like a building instead of a house got a ton of red dots. So that meant the focus was on doing houses. Well, the developers went through the roof because they claim it's much more expensive to do individual houses than to do townhouses and combined buildings. So this is where the pattern book idea comes in, of standardizing the box or letting it be whatever the home builder wants to do, and then having the front facade as something that's tailored to that culture and that particular place. You can see a street elevation from the design at the bottom, in which we have a collection of buildings, including a double shotgun. I didn't point out that the Volkswagen was in front of 2 units, not 1 unit in that previous image. It's a really skinny house going back, and creates a varied street facade, which you can see here on the right. For me, the greatest moment was when the president came to cut the ribbon for this project in 2012. He spoke of the revitalization of Treme, not of the Lafitte project. So it had become part of the community, and therefore that stigma has been released. I'll talk about it again a little bit. Early project, 1978. Richmond, Virginia, an African-American neighborhood with an affluent part, which you see on the left, and then a large area that had been cleared for urban renewal. There had been several plans. But we, after talking with residents, came up with another, really the first pattern book, where they asked us to design all the houses, and we wouldn't do that. We thought there needed to be more variety. But we did do facades in construction document level to do it, to create something that is not the same as, but which is sympathetic with the community. And Union Studio, the winners of the 2023 award, I find this an absolutely brilliant elevation and project. It's on a very wide area at the edge of a neighborhood. So its exuberance and colorfulness and quality is not just housing, it's a billboard for the whole neighborhood, which is severely depressed. So it's an image changer for how people feel about that whole neighborhood. Although it's different from anything there, it's based pretty solidly in the traditions. If you go even to the most famous Mansion Street, Benefit Street on College Hill, you'll find these wooden siding houses with white trim in a variety of different colors and forms. And that's what they did. Plugs right into that. In one of those streets north of the project I just showed you, there were a series of mansions that were in terrible disrepair and decay. They were rooming houses or crack houses, whatever they were. They were a mess. A local nonprofit bought them. Union Studio did designs for restoring them and turning them into apartment buildings, and then adding some new apartment buildings in the same general character. So it's an incremental type of approach of rebuilding a neighborhood. And then there's Santa Barbara with its fabulous Spanish colonial architecture in the best parts of town, in the most expensive real estate. And so the Public Housing Authority somehow, I don't know how they did it, but somehow managed to get superb examples of that Spanish colonial style for homeless housing, affordable housing, workforce housing, It's a wonder. I saw it for the first time 25 years ago, and we were working at the university, and we drove past, it screeched to a stop, and it was amazing. Anyway, so the point number 2, social capital. Social capital is the economic and social value of having a cohesive community in which people communicate with each other and look after each other. All sorts of studies show that communities with high social capital withstand catastrophes, ups and downs of the economy, and work very much better. So finding a way in which it's easy for people to communicate, which even with a little obstacle people will still do, as Sampe indicates here, becomes critical. One of the most important qualities is how windows relate to the street and to other units, so that there are always eyes on the street and that people look out for each other and for all creatures great and small, which you see with this perhaps over-adventurous cat causing. And if you look closely at the woman, she is petrified and doesn't quite know what to do. And then when there's an event, like this tree trimming, everybody comes out and has an opinion. You see, they're pointing up, they're giving instructions to the workers. Some of them are even gathering up some of the wood and taking it home for firewood. It becomes a community event. It reminds me of a community planning meeting very much. And it's all signs of what social capital means. So in the United States, we have porches. In this public housing project, in the process before design, as we were designing it, a leader said, and this was to me one of the most stunning things I've ever heard in a meeting. She said, we would like to have porches, not because we need another room, but so we can come out of our houses. Remember, this is a war zone. So we can come out of our houses, see each other, be together, so we can come together to solve our problems. That is the American model of citizenship, I would argue. And it comes from, it's also reflected in what I call the Great American Cross-Section. A neighborhood street, very room-like. The space is defined by the facades of the houses, and it's a public space. But the publicly owned property is only the sidewalk and the street. So in between is this in-between zone, the front porch, or the garden, or whatever it is, where we have our own front porch. My mother was born at the beginning of the 20th century, and up to her death, she referred to our porch as a piazza, which was part of the language at that time. So the piazza, or the porch, is our porch. And we are removed from but a part of the community. We have a responsibility to the community to maintain our property and treat it well. And to take care of it, watch it, supervise it, make sure it works. Here is one in Tampa and one in Edenton, South Carolina, where we have streets lined with these porches, with these in-between zones on the side, to create a unified example. Back to the Randolph neighborhood that I showed you earlier, these porches are super large for the size of the houses. They're tiny houses with big porches on them. And we had a couple parks in the plan. So this photograph was taken in 2018, which is almost 40 years after they were built. More than 40, yeah, 40 years after they were built. Immaculate. The park is not maintained by the city, it's maintained by the neighborhood, by the families around it. And every time I go to revisit it, the same thing happens. The most recent one was a little more entertaining. My wife and I were going to a meeting in Richmond one Sunday morning, or one Sunday afternoon, and we stopped on our way and parked over there on the left, just about near that fire hydrant. And I got out and started walking around, and my wife stayed in the car, and she was observing things. And a man came out from his house, opened the door with a broom, and he started sweeping like this. And then the next door neighbor came out with a broom, and then 3 or 4 ladies down the street came out for a broom. And so finally my wife figured she better do something. So she went out and she started talking to them, and she said, well, my husband is an architect and was involved in designing this. So the man turned into the house and said, it's that architect again, he's come back. But the point is, when you have people looking out for the neighborhood, being aware of what's going on, that is social capital. That's the best demonstration of social capital. In Santa Barbara, you've got these courtyards, which function the same way for that particular group, but they always have very good entrances out to the street to connect it to the street. Diversity. We know that studies have shown that diverse neighborhoods with a wide range of incomes and types of houses and buildings have more long-term sustainability. Just think of it in terms of a generation. I mean, neighborhoods are not monocultures. People come at different stages of their life, in little houses, big houses, in the course of their lives. That's what you need for a sustainable neighborhood. Now, the most famous and perhaps over-presented example of this is Haussmann's, a cartoon of Haussmann's Paris, in which in the cross-section on the left, on the ground floor, you see a rather raucous restaurant. By the way, it has a kitchen, and you'll notice at the back there's a vent. Retailers now will tell you about mixed-use development. If you can vent it, you can rent it. So Haussmann knew that. On the first floor above is the wealthy affluent apartment. Above that, a little less wealthy, pretty much less wealthy on the floor above that, and 2 apartments, and then very poor up in the attic. So it's a cross-section of Parisian society in every building spread out of all the neighborhoods. It is the model of a diverse community and neighborhood. Of course, prices are now so high that diversity has to be coped with in different ways. But that's just not the only story. That's the one that's always talked about. What's, to me, more interesting is seen in this aerial photograph of a block, it's a triangular-shaped block. Now, look, you can see the property lines. Those are different buildings with different owners. Most expensive apartments are on the perimeter. Best ones have a view and a courtyard as well. Least expensive ones are in courtyards or on light wells in the middle. Again, horizontal cross-section of income. And it has to do also with construction costs, because the diagram on the right is a group of very creative French architects who have analyzed this. The black indicates the perimeter wall, which, remember, under Haussmann's rules, had to be extremely expensive stone-carved facades. So some of them have a great deal of that expensive facades, and some, as you go towards the top, have almost none on it. Economic diversity. Now, we don't have buildings like that very much. I wish we did. We have individual buildings. And here in Norfolk, there's a neighborhood called Ghent, where you can see townhouses, a single-family house, and apartments mixed together. In a block, seen from the air, it's a different block, but seen from the air, you can see the variety of different house types. And the one on the right, you can see that block in the upper part of the drawing. It's 1,200 feet from the top of the photograph to the bottom. Look at the diversity just in that block. But then as you come south, you see a park. You can clearly see the dog park part of the park, by the way. Coming south, you can see little teeny things, which are actually townhouse-like apartments, least expensive, then apartments, then a grocery store, seniors tower, Catholic church, all within the 1,200-foot walk. And there it is on the left. Look at public housing. Single income, concentration, high concentration of poverty, all the same building, everything. Total disaster. And then suburban sprawl. Maybe a little less of a disaster, but still a disaster in its monoculture nature. Here's a project of ours that tried to take that on in the same city in Norfolk. I don't have a pointer, but the area on the right, you'll see a street running from north to south, 1 block in from the right-hand park edge. Now, that's called Godfrey Street. The buildings on the right are like the image that you see on the upper right, which is effectively public housing. The area on the left of Godfrey Street to the next street is market rate for sale housing, which sold between $300,000 and $500,000 10, 15 years ago. How do they get along? Well, there's a tenants association and a homeowners association. They meet regularly. They work it all out. Place is immaculate. And I think the key to it is in this hard to photograph, but in this image. The building on the far right is in the public housing area. It's actually 2 flats. It has the same porch as the rather expensive house, second from the left, which is a market rate for sale house. Point is, they all have the same architectural vocabulary. The architectural style masks or does not express the difference, so that everyone has an equal dignity to it. Same thing in projects in Baltimore, where in the upper one it's half public housing, half for sale, and below it's a range of incomes from $2,500, or costs from $2,500 a year to $2,500 a month in that project, and it works. Now, Dan Paralek of Optikos has done a great service in his Missing Middle book, which you see on the top, which looks for different kinds of types, courtyard houses, accessory dwelling units, and other things. UDA picked up on that with a pattern book with a series of recommendations for how it might be done in a specific location. Union Studio took it quite literally and looked at their building types and prototypes and lined it up, and then use it as a strategy for going into neighborhoods. The red dots are part of one phase of a redevelopment or a revitalization program in which either new or renovated buildings are plugged in to the fabric and are gradually upgrading the area. Important to know that they are spiffed up versions of all the houses that are already there that are in much less good condition. So it ennobles the existing condition, and I think it's a brilliant strategy. In New Orleans, in the project I showed you, we have a lot of diversity of building type in terms of the different types of houses, and there's even a senior building which is broken up as several buildings. However, it was intended to be mixed income, but it was right after Katrina. It took a long time to get it built. There were a lot of people who evacuated to faraway places, urgent need to get back, and the policy was changed to make it all public housing except for one block. So here it is from the air. You can see it. And I was really depressed about that. I thought, we're not going in the right direction. Treme, which had been in terrible condition, suddenly became a hot property, particularly after the Katrina restoration, where New Orleans became a hot location. So people were buying falling down houses for $200,000 and $300,000 and fixing them up. So Treme is becoming gentrified, but we have this stock of permanently affordable housing. So in the larger sense, this is a diverse community. And that's another strategy that we can think about. Final topic is legible and easy to use, and it comes back to Alvin Shore. He said that there's evidence. He combined a bunch of studies and analyses to make these. These are not just platitudes. If our ability to understand the city and to use it is directly related to our success in life. So I have personally felt, at the beginning of my career, a moral obligation to try to design cities that people can understand and use and easily function in. The Great American Grid, an equivalent grid that connects every door to every other door, comes back to the title. And the key thing is the relationship of the front door to that grid so that you are connected to every other door, which means connected to opportunities and new experiences. This little guy here, when we look at the larger picture, is on a street in Manhattan. And his street connects to other streets. Maybe not providing a direct pathway to Wall Street, but it's there. And of course, it is the Horatio Alger tradition of rags to riches. The American 19th century, early 20th century city has been called the most efficient upward mobility machine in history because of this. Philadelphia certainly shows it with its grid, and you can see how the townhouses are connected to skyscrapers. Back in Randolph, there had been a plan for a series of projects with inverted greens and parking lots around it. And we came in with what was considered an outrageously radical, stupid proposal, was to make a neighborhood with streets with houses on them so that they could all be connected. And every house has its front door connected. Sometimes the worst examples are the most illuminating. This is in England, in Essex, east of London, in a new town called Basildon. And it's a social housing project called the Craylands. It has one street for 750 units. You can see the street is that loop going around the outside. That loop provides access to a series of somewhat complicated connected parking lots. The photograph of it shows what it looks like when you do that. And in the middle, you can just barely see some green. That is a labyrinthine green connection. 4 anecdotes. The community group held a lottery. The winner wasn't at the drawing. They had his address. No one on the committee could find it. They'd lived there for years. They couldn't find it. Finally, 3 months later, he turned up and got his prize. Lifespan in that project is 12 years shorter than outside. The project has the lowest participation rate in the region in continuing education, job training, and job finding programs. And the community college is right next door in that gray blob that you see. Of course, our proposal was to add streets, complicated by the fact that more than 50% of the existing buildings had to remain. And when we did it, some people were very nervous. They said, our children don't know how to cross the street, because the only streets they'd had were the highways around it. Now, if you're preparing for life, can you imagine if you enter life and you can't cross the street? What are you going to do? So this stuff can really hurt people, and did for a long time. Final example is one I'm involved with now, original conception, and now as a backseat driver. But this is downtown Norfolk on the left. You can see, I think, easily 3 different public housing projects with 1,700 people in them. You can also see, I hope, if you see that round shape, which is the Nervi Stadium arena, a huge highway separating the downtown from this lower project. The question is how to bring it together. It's also an area that floods very badly, particularly on the right-hand side of the site. So the plan did several things, created the kind of very carefully designed park to manage water, and then a network of streets, a major north-south street connecting the Martin Luther King Memorial on the north to a mid-19th century beautiful Catholic basilica, and then connecting streets that link it to the city, and then the buildings and of different kinds of uses fit within that framework. So you've got to get that framework right by then. And these are some of the images of those spaces which are meant to be the orienting spaces so people can find their way. I'm going to conclude with Saint-Pé. This wonderful image of an imaginary Paris. You see 2 people looking extremely self-contented. So there's no image problem here. They're looking out at the neighborhood, which we know looks after everybody, including cats. And they can clearly see and understand the structure of the city. This is our ideal. But look carefully in the upper left. There's something sinister up there. It's a construction crane. And I think the man is looking at it, wondering, is that going to help us to continue this tradition? Or is it going to undermine it? I think the former is our job. Let's do it. Thank you.
Ray, that was fantastic. You certainly set the bar pretty high for me, but I'll do my best to follow on. Can I just say, first of all, what a pleasure it is to be here. It's my wife and our first time in Charleston, and thanks to the ICA and everyone who's made us so welcome here. It's been the most fantastic visit, the most fantastic conference with some great talks, very stimulating as well, and it's a great pleasure to be part of that. They say that our 2 countries are divided by a common language. I'll do my best this morning to disprove that assertion, but I apologize now if I say things which are not familiar to you, and by all means, let's pick them up in questions at the end. So I'm just simply trying to address the theme which Eric gave, both Ray and myself, connecting society through the front door. And like Ray, I've also picked a number of themes which I'll try and track through a couple of projects to show you some ways which we're trying to deal with those in the UK. The situation in Britain is very similar to America, that development is in a terrible state. Affordable housing is seen as a blight on development. Most developers try and avoid it if at all possible. If they have to provide it, it's put in the worst part of the site and built as cheaply as possible. And work really started nearly 30 years ago with now His Majesty the King, who was then the Prince of Wales, with Poundbury. And many of us know a lot about Poundbury. What's not often quite so well known, it's not just the urban form and the mixed-use walkable neighbourhoods and the local character, but they were pioneers there too of tenure blind affordable clusters woven through the scheme. Poundbury is in quite a wealthy part of the country relative to some other parts, and it's been groundbreaking in many ways. And if you haven't been to it, I highly recommend when you're in the UK that you go and visit it. The next Poundbury is called Nansleddon, which is in Cornwall in the southwest of Britain. Nansleddon is Cornish for wide valley, and the clue is in the name. It is indeed a wide valley. Cornwall is one of the poorest parts of the UK, and therefore trying to achieve the principles established at Poundbury of delivering affordable housing and meeting local need in an economically deprived area is extremely challenging. And I picked the short straw and was lucky enough to be made both master planner and coordinating architect for that scheme. It will be twice the size of Poundbury when it's finished. It will be 4,000 homes. It's a 40-year project, so I will be extremely old when it is finished. But we've been on site for 10 years, and we've got quite a lot built, so I'll be showing you that as we go through the slides. So I think it's interesting at the start just to reflect on why we're in the mess that we're in. And maybe it's slightly different in America from the UK, but I suspect some of the underlying issues are broadly similar. After World War II, we started to impose planning upon the UK. There was very limited planning control before that time. And the 1948 Town and Country Planning Act was the first sort of big state move to control development. And thereafter, there's been a progressive move to use regulation as a way of driving better outcomes. And I think one of the things we need to do as a group is to question whether regulation is the best way to deliver better outcomes, or whether there might be, in fact, a way of using a carrot, not the stick, to do so. Because certainly in Britain, planning policy now has become this bureaucratic monster, which I show you on the screen. And it is pretty terrifying when you have to go in for planning, because it can take years. And the bar charts, which have not come out that well, show you the proportion of development done by what's known as the volume house builders, the 5 or 6 publicly owned house builders who are owned with PLCs, we call them in the UK, with shareholders. They need their profits delivered every quarter. So it's all about short-term return on capital. And in 2008, 31% of development in the UK was done by these 5 or 6 companies. By 2015, it's 59%, and the yellow bar at the other end, the 12% on the 2015 upper bar, was what we call SME developers, the small local developers. As of today, that figure in the UK is less than 10%. So because of the speculative risk and delay of getting a planning permission, the gene pool of developers is shrinking to those with the biggest pockets, and you can see a very fine example on the right-hand side. Most development by these PLC developers are small, I would argue, cancerous housing estates. They're small pockets of residential development built on the edge of existing settlements. They're, in my mind, layouts, not places. They're designed to deliver the maximum number of houses as quickly and cheaply as possible. There's no thought to connectivity to future phases of development beyond them, so they're all very poorly connected. Because they're small bits of development, there's not enough money in them to deliver the wider bits of infrastructure we need to build better towns for the longer term. So these people who live in these developments have to live off existing town centres, which causes enormous problems with clogging of roads and so on as well. And even if they are low carbon, and that of course is the hottest subject of all at the moment, you might live in a low-carbon house, but if you have to use the Volkswagen to go everywhere, as we all know, that's not low carbon. And so you're not really dealing with somewhere you can make a low-carbon lifestyle. There's some examples here which build on some of the images that Ray showed a minute ago of the product of these sorts of publicly owned development companies. They can be built anywhere. They have no local identity. The materials are chosen to be as cheap as possible. The convenience of construction is paramount. So even on the top left image, where they've made a modest effort to put some local stone on the ground floor, rather like some of the images that Ray showed, they then cover the elevation with gas pipes and gas meters to get gas up to the apartments on the upper floor. It's not beautiful, and it's got this very poorly defined public realm, as you've seen in some of the earlier slides and presentations today. And these, of course, as we've heard already, are very depressing places to live and can be the cause of all kinds of other social issues which become much more difficult to unpick. And because of all these issues, development is not popular. It's ugly, it has no benefit for those affected by it, and because everything is tuned to deliver maximum short-term financial return and not necessarily meeting local needs, all the developers' needs, which are the top of the pile, if you like, it becomes very difficult to convince people development is a good idea. And to my mind, it's become a vicious circle where, because of bad development, it's unpopular, it creates political pressure, there's yet more regulation, which increases the cost of permission, thereby reducing the gene pool of developers even further, and so it gets worse and worse and worse. And that's been a progressive problem that we've been wrestling with for a very long time. So, in the same way that Ray picked some principles, and there's some crossover between our two talks, I want now to turn to Nansleddon and the work that we've been doing with the Duchy of Cornwall and the then Prince of Wales, who has deeply involved in these issues and deeply concerned about them. And I might say also that the new Prince of Wales, Prince William, is also passionately interested in this issue of affordable housing, and his main mission while he's Prince of Wales is to try and solve homelessness in the UK. So we're really on it in terms of trying to look at this and find new ways of going forward. And this is very much the focus of my talk. So my 5 principles: inclusivity, local identity, dwelling as a mirror of self, picking up Ray's phrase, low carbon buildings, but also creating somewhere where you can live a low carbon lifestyle, and then picking up on Eric's earlier point about stewardship, securing the delivery. So you don't just promise the earth and deliver nothing. What you promise at the planning stage actually is delivered. And so no more lies for the people that we consult during the process. So turning first to inclusivity, back in 2003, the last time that Ray and I met, we were looking at some principles we wanted to establish at the outset of the Nansleddon project, which would help guide us as a team as it got bigger over the years, with hundreds of people getting involved, to give them a common purpose and a common focus, but also as we spoke to the community and both locally and more regionally, to say, look, this is what we're trying to achieve, measure us by our success or failure, and keep talking to us. So for things we can do better, come and talk to us. And even now we have an ongoing pattern of consultation. So the principles were obviously to be led by public consultation. The Prince's Foundation did an inquiry by design initially, but we have regular feedback sessions now to make sure we're listening to the community, and if we're not getting things right or can do things better, they have a voice to enable us to improve the situation. Everything's led by a master plan, building on the work at Poundbury, but sustainability was really heart and soul of the approach, and everything was to be led by an overarching sustainability principle, not just low carbon houses, but somewhere where you can make a low carbon lifestyle, and thinking about economic and social sustainability as well. So it's sustainability in its broadest sense. Reflecting local identity, as we've heard from other speakers today, using local materials. Nansleddon is probably over $1 billion of its gross development value. If you can put that money back into the local economy of a deprived area, that makes a massive difference to the economy of that place. It also creates opportunity for young people, and it becomes a virtuous circle. Making sure we respond to local needs, making sure what we do relates to the older part of the town, thinking about environmental impact to try and improve the ecology of the place by weaving that through the scheme as well, using land efficiently, and making sure, of course, that it is viable. And in this economically deprived area, viability is quite challenging. We've been on site now for 8 years, and we have been building at 100 houses a year. We've got about 650 houses built at the moment with a wide variety of tenure types and sizes, as again you've heard from Ray and others. And the idea is that people, we're the only people really in Cornwall building family houses. Newquay, where this town is built, is the surf capital of Britain. It's got the best surfing beach in the UK. Someone even amusingly called it surf-free when it started, but that's another joke. But the idea is to create a place where you can bring up a family, and over your own life you can move within the development too. So there are starter homes, family homes, homes for older retired people. The idea is to create a community where people can move but stay close to their friends and build that sense of togetherness. Within the master plan, and I think this is something which is slightly different from some of the earlier phases of Poundbury, we've been very dogmatic in our coding of it to create a clear street hierarchy where the typologies of the buildings relate to the different types of streets. So this is our main street where we've got grander architecture, grander boundary wall treatments, bigger front gardens, 2.5-story buildings, grander use of materials and so on. So the typologies we use, whether it's an individual villa or a semi-detached house or even a small apartment block, typologically you know you're on a main street because the buildings reinforce the urban network created through the master plan. These are secondary and tertiary streets. Hopefully you can tell from the slides which are which. And I might say also because the economy is so challenging there, we're working in partnership with local developers using their standard house types. So these are house types they've engineered to make as cheap and efficient as possible, as well tailored to the local market in terms of the accommodation they provide. And the only input we do is to arrange them to make nice streets and to either design or code the street elevation, the public realm elevation. And that limits the abnormal costs to about 10% extra for the normal construction costs of these houses. But through monitoring what's actually happened, the sales premium is at least 10% and sometimes over 25% because the place that you're creating is so much better. Early delivery of infrastructure, as again we've heard from other speakers over the last couple of days, is hugely important. So delivering significant green space early on where the community can go and walk their dog or go and have children's parties and that kind of thing. You can see a summer fete happening in the top image here. Delivering a primary school. This was the first new primary school built in this county for over 30 years because most people try and avoid building that kind of thing because it costs money. But the reality is that the next house you sell to a new primary school will sell for a premium. So if you take a globalized view of the economics, again, it does make sense. It's just about pump priming the machine to get the best out of the other end. And similarly, we've just finished on the bottom right-hand side a complex with a live-work unit, a work hub, and some office space, and the building with the green roof is a new nursery school, so you can drop your child into nursery and go and meet some friends for a coffee, do some work and pick the child up. It just seems to work with the kind of vibe of the younger generation who are now producing children with the way they want to live, particularly in places like this. Our second issue is local identity, and again, you've heard a lot of this from other speakers, and like Charleston, Newquay is on the North Cornish coast, on the Atlantic coast, and so it is a maritime town where the weather is often quite severe. Because of the salt-laden wind, we struggle to get trees to go properly, and timber often doesn't last terribly well. And so the paucity of materials relative to other parts of the UK means there's a lot of use of render and hung slate, as you can see in this idealized image. And we use colour, which of course is cheap, to create, rather as you have in Bay Street and some of the areas here in Charleston. Simple use of colour and restrained use of detail can still create a sense of identity. As I mentioned, when Ray and I first met, he really taught me how to do pattern books, and our first task at Nansleden was to produce a pattern book to understand both the urban and architectural character of the town. This is an example of the section looking at urban space types. This is the High Street in the old part of Newquay, looking how it responds to topography, the size of the view corridor, the canyon of the street, the types of buildings that define its edges. Really just trying to understand the nature of the kind of space which is familiar to people, and also thinking about on that Atlantic coast with the severe weather, we find that the streets are often quite tight to give that degree of protection from the full fury of winter weather. The next section looked at architectural types. The double-fronted house, which you see here, is a very common type of house in the West Country. topography is often quite steeply sloping, and if your roads follow the topography, this kind of house minimizes the amount of excavation to make a building platform, and therefore is a cheap solution. And throughout the ages, you can see some examples on the top left-hand side, different styles and materials and so on, but the fundamental type is quite well defined. We look too at materials and details. As I say, there's a great paucity of good natural materials there, but even things like little slate details on the verge, as you can see second down on the left-hand side, or the use of slate for windowsills, just little things lift the eye and create that sense of interest and identity, and actually don't cost very much money at all. We look carefully too at the sources of local materials, and as I say, there's not a huge choice, but of course we know from tried and tested buildings of different eras that these materials respond well to a harsh maritime climate, and therefore we need to look carefully at how we can work with the quarries and producers of these things to make them possible to use them again. I'll come back to that in a second. And we found actually the pattern book we produced, which I've just shown you extracts from, was playing back to that local community who'd become visually blind to the character of their town, and we all are to a degree by familiarity. When you produce a pattern book, people see their town with new eyes. We sometimes used to describe it as a maypole around which everyone began to dance, because it got everyone excited about what was special about their town and how you could then start to do new and creative things with it. And also, as I mentioned, with the materials, it's how you can put money back into that local economy to actually create better economic sustainability as well. My third point, again picking up on Ray's phrase, is the dwelling as the mirror of self, and that sense of self-identity, of course, is hugely important, as everything that Ray said I completely agree with. In this scheme, 30% of the houses are affordable, and we have very judicious use of local materials. Acres, there aren't very many expensive materials there. The quantity of granite and slate is quite limited, and so we'll often put them in key junctions. You can see on the two bottom examples, two buildings, one with a hung slate elevation and one with a local stone elevation. And we position these buildings where they have maximum impact on the public realm. So obviously these visible houses are a good place to invest that money. And we don't mind whether that's an affordable house, and one of those houses is affordable, I won't tell you which one it is, or whether it's an open market house, because it's placemaking led, not economics led. And most developers will say, why would you do that? Because you won't get the money back on the affordable house. And it's true, you won't. And we have an analogy, having wrestled with how to rationalize this in our own minds, that there's a game of golf. And on buildings like that, you just chuck the golf clubs away and go off to the 19th hole again to drown your sorrows, because you've gone so many shots over par. But if you look at the economics over a phase of 100 houses, you go a few shots over par on a house like that, but you can save a few shots on other houses in more quieter parts of the development. So across a phase of 100 houses, you're the right build price per square foot. But in placemaking terms, you've created value by making a better place. And because you've woven the affordable housing more successfully throughout the scheme, on balance, you've made a better place socially as well as economically. And this is a piece of the master plan for the bits we've built already. As I say, 30% of the houses are affordable, of all scales, from one-bedroom flats through to 4- and 5-bedroom family houses. And you can see here from the coloured clusters that they are clustered throughout the development. They are completely tenure blind, as you've heard. Of those, some of them are affordable rent, which offers a 20% discount on open market rent, and others are what they call intermediate, which is either a discounted rent but less than 20%, or you can buy partial equity in the house. And once you've built up enough equity, you can then move out of that and use that down payment for the next open market house as you become more affluent yourself, and then the next person can come in and start accruing equity as well. And we're in constant discussion with the council over this, because obviously need changes over time, and it's really important that you remain light on your feet and you can adapt what you're delivering to meet that local need. So here are a couple of slides where we've got areas of street, some of which are affordable, some of which are open market. And just to help you see which is which, I've coloured the sidewalk blue for the affordable units, and then where it's left uncoloured, those are the open market houses. And similarly here. And you can see on the two bottom examples, these are tertiary shared surface lanes with cottages on both sides. I mentioned the issue of the holistic view of sustainability, and I'm now on a zero carbon working group for the Duchy, and the buildings I'm showing you here are, in the UK we call it a LETI standard, which is almost passive house in terms of its embodied carbon, but we're using local materials, and we achieve that by using local slate, which has obviously low embodied carbon, and the concrete blocks we use are made from China clay waste, a local waste material too, 10 miles away from the site. So although the built materials are traditional, by taking time to understand what you've got locally and working with the suppliers of those, you can then start to make a huge difference in the amount of embodied carbon that you use. With the granite quarries, we found out what shapes of granite they could use and make cheaply. And you can see on the bottom right-hand image there, some of the granite is quite rose-coloured and some of it is silver. The silver granite is generally used in the City of London. It's the most expensive material, which we can't really afford. But 40% of what they produce is the colour with the iron flecks on it, the rose-coloured stuff, which we think looks fantastic. And so we will take everything out of the quarry that they can't sell to London in terms of the variety of material. And when they're doing nothing else, we know how many of each shape we're going to need every year, so they can put it on pallets. So they can work at 100% efficiency with no risk. And we take all the waste from the quarry and use that for road base as well. So against effectively a kind of 40-year arrangement with us and the local materials suppliers, they can then invest against that certainty to open new faces of the quarry, buy new equipment, get new apprentices, and we get the best material at the best possible price. And so again, it's a virtuous circle. And our ambition is to create one job per household, which was also the ambition at Poundbury. Poundbury, I think, has got about 2,500 houses. It's got over 3,000 jobs now. So by building things slowly and in tune with local need, you can actually make a proper working town, not just another housing estate. So I won't dwell on this. These are some statistics from our working group in terms of our performance. And I say, although the buildings look traditional, and we are putting more photovoltaic panels on the roof now, both the traditional ones on the back elevations, you can see on the bottom left-hand side, and also look-alike photovoltaic slates on the front. We are miles ahead of the PLC house builders, and we're not far off where we need to be to get to these almost passive house standard, and we're still doing ongoing work in concert with the developers. So this is where the site is. You can see we're on the coast, as I say, like we are in Charleston here. The old part of the town is clustered around a harbour. There's a lot of 20th century, I may have a pointer here. The harbour is here. This is the old part of the town. This is all 20th century suburban scrawl. And then the red line shows the area of search for this significant urban extension. And to the credit of the council, they said, unlike normal policy, which is to take a 5-year view of the future need, they said take a 50-year view of what the needs of this town are. So you can think long term, and then you can work back from a big vision into shorter term delivery horizons. Everything fits into a bigger picture. And the vision was to create a new sub-town town centre to support the existing suburban areas as well, to help revitalise those, as well as meeting the needs of our new community. The master plan, this version of it picks out the primary and secondary streets. The secondary streets generally go along the contour, the tertiary streets go down the contour and are discontinuous. And the blocks are typically 40 by 60 yards, which you know from experience are very versatile when you come to actually work out what goes in them. And we're building at 100 houses a year, so it takes a long time, but you're building in tune with the pace that material suppliers can keep up with you and at the saturation rate that the local market can absorb as well. As a firm, we've developed this network analysis software, which we market as Place Logic, and it produces a heat map of the desirability of some routes over others. And we were challenged in our design review process, why have you put the commercial units where you have in our local town centres? And through this software, we're able to show that in each case, the commercial units are located on natural hotspots on the network. So, and we know from experience with the software in other places that it does actually work. And we've now started to build some of these centres, and they have all thrived. So this is showing where the local centres are in the master plan. And the idea is within where you live, within 5 minutes, everyone can walk to some shops and some amenity, and within 10 minutes, you can all walk to Nansleden, the new Market Street town centre. As I say, we built the first of our local centres, which had 14 units. They were under 1- and 2-bedroom affordable flats, so you get 3-storey buildings, which help to define more significant squares. We've now got about 40 of these little commercial units built so far, and we've got another waiting list of 40 more companies locally that want the same kind of space. So the perceived wisdom is that no one builds an employment space because it's not viable, but actually building them in this way, there's a huge need for entrepreneurial little businesses to get going with ultra-fast broadband. And if you do it as part of a mixed-use scheme, in placemaking terms, you're making a virtue of it as well, and helping to get people into local employment where they can walk from where they live. Some of you will be very pleased to know, unlike Panbury, we've incorporated the Art Deco, which to our mind is part of the seaside vernacular. Of course, the compositional principles are fundamentally classical, but it's very cheap to build, and hopefully it has something of that sort of light-hearted seaside character to it. We also have a spoil strategy for the earth that's moved during construction. A typical house on one of these schemes uses about 100 cubic yards of material, which normally gets taken off to landfill somewhere else. Of course, doing that has an enormous carbon footprint and costs a lot of money, and all the neighbouring towns get fed up with 40 years of trucks rolling past their door as well. So in this instance, we decided to put that spoil on the hinterland on the development, and because the land is sloping, we've created a series of terraces with community gardens and orchards, which is another amenity, if you like. And once you've made up the ground like that, you can't build on it in the future. So it's sterilised from development in perpetuity. And it saves a lot of money and a lot of carbon. On this scheme, you reckon it saves about £6 million, which again, you can then use that money to go back and build some more affordable houses and do something of local worth. So my last point is the secure delivery. I often say only half-heartedly that design is the easy bit, and particularly with the talent in this room, it really would be the easy bit. But it's how you can deal with the issue of stewardship or secure delivery where the main problems arise. I say often with planning, what's promised at that stage is broken, which is one of the reasons why communities are so suspicious of new development. And so we've evolved a new way of going into contract with the developers, a partnership, if you like, to make sure that the landowner remains involved all the way through, and that we can actually work with the developers to deal with the issues that they've got. So we have a landowner's vision and the commercial acumen of the developer working in partnership to create the best possible outcome, which is called a common aspiration. So the way in which it works, there are a series of vision documents, which we haven't got time to go into today, to do with energy, sustainability, water, food, all the aspects of sustainability. And the developers are legally obliged to deliver the scheme in accordance with those vision documents. And rather like Gary was describing yesterday, we have various gateways we go through in terms of sign-off. But the final sign-off stage is the end of construction. So only when it's been built properly can they sell it to a third party. And then beyond that, if you buy a house here, there's a design and community code. So it's like a covenant. You can't do what's shown on the bottom right-hand side to the house that you might buy on the top right-hand side. And whereas some people think that this restriction will put people off, in fact, we find it adds value because you're buying certainty that the person next door is not going to leave a washing machine in their front garden. It's going to be a nice place. The public realm will be well looked after. And we also find that once residents are more aware of their public realm, they take more of an interest in it, and they help look after it to a higher standard as well. Now, I've nearly finished, you'll be glad to hear, but because of this, and because we're able to deliver better development than can be required by normal planning policy, we've been invited by the local authority to apply what's called a local development order, which effectively gives us a detailed planning consent for the whole scheme within certain agreed parameters. And I was discussing this with Andres briefly last night. And in terms of an engine to regenerate a depressed economy, if you want to come and build a house or an office block on this scheme, we can be on site in 6 months with no planning risk. And with a 50-year or 40-year vision, and that taking away the planning risk, that becomes a huge attractor to get businesses there to help stimulate this economy and create a more dynamic place. Some time ago, an institution called Create Streets, which now Nicholas Boy Smith, who runs it, runs the government's Office for Place, did an appraisal of Nansleden and this whole issue of how you can make development popular. This scheme has gone from 400 homes to 4,000 because it is popular. And the Prince's Foundation have done studies too, looking at this additional build cost and the sales premium. And we're now looking also at the resale values too, and we're massively outperforming the local market in terms of the price increase year on year. We also monitor the postcodes of the buyers. So apart from the 30% of affordable, which obviously are local buyers, 70% of the open market houses are also going to Cornish postcodes. And that meeting that local need is obviously hugely important spiritually. As a consequence of all of this, we're now on the front cover of most recent government documents on planning as a sort of an exemplar scheme, but there's a lot more work to do. We're going to have a change of government probably in 18 months' time, and so we're waiting to see what will emerge from the new regime. And we're now building up a portfolio of these sorts of projects across the UK with landed estates, with local authorities, and starting to work also with pension funds whose view of their financial return is attuned to this sort of long-term building up of long-term capital. This one is at Blenheim in Woodstock, where they've been refused for a housing estate of 200 homes. This conceptually is a new hamlet on the edge of the town with a square in the middle of it with some employment space around it. You can see some streetscapes and early visualization of the central square. Now, so that's an aerial view. This is a CGI view. The Blenheim Park is on the left-hand side of the road, you can see on the left-hand side. And the ploughed field at the bottom of the image is where we will have phase 2 in due course. We've left tails in the right place on the roads to make sure we get decent connectivity down the line. This scheme is also on site. We've built about 200 homes so far. And on this site, 50% of the houses are affordable. So every other house is an affordable house. But again, they're in tenure blind clusters. The policy here is a 20% discount on open market rent. But the estate think that's not enough. So they're offering a 40% discount on voluntarily. And because the rent on the affordable housing is inflation-proof, and every 40 years the affordable houses are recalibrated to see if there's still a local need for affordable housing or not. For a long-term asset holder like a landed estate, they can take a long-term review of that because they've still got the income in the meantime, which is covering their costs, and down the line there might be the carrot of an open market house as well. And of course they're also meeting local needs in the meantime, which is important to them as well. But in spite of all those statistics, the open market houses are selling for 25% premium as well. So even though every other house is an affordable house, the open market houses sell for a significant premium. So this idea that affordable housing is a blight just isn't true, particularly in affluent areas like this. My last slide is a CGI of the central square, which is currently under construction, where you can see again the mixture of flats and employment space on the ground floor. And we are going rather over time, but thank you very much anyway.
On behalf of all of us, we want to thank you for two memorable, very thoughtful presentations of some very meaningful work. I know we have a few minutes for questions, but I wanted to start out with maybe the first one. You're showing the work that you both have shared with us has a tremendous amount of craft and thoughtfulness in that work. I think one question I might have is obviously we started the presentation with obviously the considerable number of units of which we're behind here in the United States, and I'm sure similarly in the UK. Are there ways in which we might incorporate mass production techniques and some of the things of which we can deliver to these projects without losing some of that craft and thoughtfulness in the process? I know we have a lot of traditions of that in the classical tradition. Can you, maybe Hugh, if you could tell us a little bit about some of your experience there?
So, yes, another strand of our work is we're working with a modular housing company. They used to have their own factory. They've sold that factory now. They're now just effectively a business which doesn't have any construction capability, but we're working together to produce a pattern book of traditional building types with a catalogue of regional materials and details. And the way that this modular housing system works, it's effectively in a leaf of construction. So it's effectively a vanilla house that you can buy, and it can be on site, and someone can move in 5 hours after the unit's been delivered to site. And then the external envelope, the elevation effectively, whether it's timber or brick or stone or render, can follow up, but it's off the critical path. And their motivation is to produce better, more rapid delivery of affordable housing in these very deprived areas that looks as good and traditional as some of the stuff that you've seen over here. And we are hoping in time to market it in the US as well as in the UK. And in terms of future-proof, because of the modular construction technique, all the weight and the structure is the external box of these houses. And so over time you can reconfigure the interior as well. And we're currently working with the factory that will produce the early ones of these to look at the carbon footprint of those and how we can minimize that carbon footprint and optimize the quality of construction. And of course in a factory condition you can achieve much better air tightness and insulation. And so I'm quite excited by that. There's another way of delivering significant volumes of affordable housing without compromising the quality, and you've still got the opportunity to put bay windows and porches and all the things that will give that character that Ray talked so eloquently about. But the fundamental box, in the same way that the scheme I showed you in Cornwall, the developer box is untouched. It's the public realm elevation that matters, that makes the difference in terms of placemaking.
Ray, final thoughts?
I don't think we're as far along. That sounds fantastic. I have to, there's a cautionary note here. In the 1970s, the Secretary of HUD was George Romney, who was an automobile executive. And he started a program called Operation Breakthrough with the ambition of putting mass production techniques from the car industry into residential construction. By the end of it, we all called it Operation Breakdown, because there are so many intricacies within the construction industry that seem very difficult to overcome. The pattern book idea is that there's a box and then there's something you add to it. And certainly production builders have standard boxes, and gradually they're using panelized constructions. And there are some who are doing what you're doing there, but I don't think any nearly as well. But I think it would be a really good thing to pursue. Should have forgotten all about that. Thank you for reminding me. To pursue that, because that find some manufacturers, maybe the ICAA and the CNU can figure out some way of collaborating to bring this about. I think it is an answer to it. You still have all the other costs that I mentioned, but more efficient you can make the construction, the better.
Well, I know we're over time. I think we want to, and I know we have a presentation on the heels of this one, so we want to thank you again for both of your presentations, and thanks for coming.